Punctuation is a widespread challenge for many people. Nevertheless, when a person is not sure about correct punctuation, it is better not to predict or to guess, but to take a time to check it out. Like a road sign for drivers, punctuation is the same to readers. So reading right is like driving right. Otherwise, text makes no sense at all. Commas set introductory words, phrases, and clauses apart from the rest of a sentence. This isolation serves as a signal to a reader to make a pause and to give words a chance to show their meaning in certain contexts, not interfering with other parts of the text. Here's some examples. Single word example. Afterward, fans came backstage and surrounded the actors and actresses. A phrase example. Without an invitation, fans swarmed backstage in excitement. And a clause example. After the fans began to head to their cars, the actors and actresses took their first break in 2 hours. A series is a list embedded in a sentence with a conjunction, typically the word and, between the last two items in the list. Absence of the commas makes series confusing. So here's an example of a series in a sentence without commas. Penny's costume included a long blue dress, a red bonnet, black laced-up shoes, a heavy gold pendant on a chain, and a very full petticoat. However, with the commas, it's much easier to read. Penny's costume included a long blue dress, a red bonnet, black laced-up shoes, a heavy gold pendant on a chain, and a very full petticoat. When a sentence is made up of two independent clauses joined by a coordinated conjunction, such as and, but, for, nor, or, so, or yet, a comma is necessary between the two clauses. Here's an example of a compound sentence with two independent clauses. Mitch arrived an hour early for the first rehearsal, and he spent the time looking through the costume closets. Here's an example of a sentence with two clauses, one of which is not independent. Mitch arrived an hour early for the first rehearsal and spent the time looking through the costume closets. The first example requires a comma between two independent clauses. The second one, because one is a dependent clause, it does not require a comma. Some examples of non-essential words include adjective phrases and clauses, words of direct address, interjections, and appositives. These sort of words and phrases should be separated from the rest of the sentences. Some adjective phrases and clauses are essential to the meaning of a sentence, and some are not. If they are essential, no comma is needed. Adjective clauses can be identified since they often begin with the relative pronouns where, when, which, who, whom, whose, or that. Look at these examples. In this first example, the comma is needed. To Kill a Mockingbird, which was Malick's first play, lasted almost 2 hours. The second example here is one where a comma is not needed. Actors who give constant effort can inspire others in the cast to do well. Appositives are nouns or noun phrases that restate an immediately preceding noun or noun phrase. Here's an example. Malick's first play, To Kill a Mockingbird, had 6 performances. Malick only had one first play, so the title of the play is a restatement of Malick's first play. Since this sentence is complete with all meaning intact, even if the words To Kill a Mockingbird were removed, the words need to be separated with commas. The next example. My husband, Kyle, has visited the To Kill a Mockingbird Museum in Monroeville. Since my husband identifies as a single person, the name Kyle merely restates his identity and thus adds no new information. Therefore, Kyle should be set apart with commas. A comma should be placed between coordinate adjectives that are not joined with the word and. Here's an example. Atticus is a good role for Malick since Malick is a tall, stately guy. This sentence requires commas since Malick could be a stately tall guy, or he could be tall and stately, or he could be stately and tall. There are lots of ways of expressing that. Commas between cumulative adjectives are not used. And so here's an example of a cumulative adjective. Atticus Finch is a dedicated defense attorney. This is a cumulative adjective situation where it would not work to rearrange adjective to say defense dedicated attorney or dedicated and defense attorney. Therefore, no commas are needed. A comma should be used prior to or just after the quotations in dialogue. Also, a comma is used before a direct quotation. Here's an example. Jem said, comma, quotation mark, there goes the meanest man that ever took a breath of life, period, quotation mark. Here's an example of a comma after a dialogue. Quotation, the one thing that doesn't abide by majority rule is a person's conscience, comma, quotation mark, said Atticus Finch. Here's an example of no comma needed before or after a direct quotation because it is not preceded by a verb. According to Miss Maudie Atkinson, Atticus, quote, can make somebody's will so airtight you can't break it. And here's an example where no comma is needed before or after an indirect quote. Atticus told Jem that it was a sin to kill a mockingbird. Details such as dates, addresses, geographic names, company names, letter and email components, titles that go with names and numbers all require commas when used in text and sometimes when used alone. Now here's an example of dates. When a date is written in a month, day, year order in isolation, you need to use a comma between the day and year. December 25th, comma, 1962. When a date is written in month, day, year order within a sentence and does not fall at the end of the sentence, a comma needs to be added between the day and the year and between the year and the rest of the sentence. So on December 25th, comma, 1962, comma, the movie To Kill a Mockingbird opened in theaters. Two of the most common problems people have with compound sentences are comma splices and fused sentences. To understand these problems, it is enough to recognize the possible compound sentence formats. First, you could have two independent clauses separated with a comma and coordinating conjunction, and, but, so, far, nor, or yet. Or you could have two independent clauses separated with a semicolon by itself. Or you could have two independent clauses separated with a semicolon and a conjunctive adverb, such as however, therefore, consequently, moreover, and so forth, used to clarify a specific logical relationship between the two independent clauses. So let's look at these two different situations that could result in common splices. The first example, her name was Jean Louise Finch. She wanted everyone to call her Scout. Well, the corrected form is her name was Jean Louise Finch, but she wanted everyone to call her Scout. Another example, Atticus didn't want Scout to fight. However, she could not ignore injustices. The corrected form is Atticus didn't want Scout to fight, semicolon. However, she could not ignore injustices. A fused sentence occurs when two independent clauses are joined without any punctuation. So the example, the wrong example, the example of an error is Mr. Cunningham is very poor. He cannot pay Atticus for legal services. There needs to be some kind of punctuation or something between poor and he. There are here two independent clauses. The first correction is Mr. Cunningham is very poor, comma, so he cannot pay Atticus for legal services. The next option is Mr. Cunningham is very poor, period. He cannot pay Atticus for legal services. Another option, Mr. Cunningham is very poor, semicolon. He cannot pay Atticus for legal services. Option 4, Mr. Cunningham is very poor, semicolon, therefore, comma, he cannot pay Atticus for his legal services. Example 5, Mr. Cunningham cannot pay Atticus for his legal services because he is very poor. This requires no comma, but it requires substantial rewriting. And finally, because he is very poor, comma, Mr. Cunningham cannot pay Atticus for his legal services.